Yes, sir. She thinks you're a big shot. You probably look like...
Since his first debut in 1934, Donald Duck has grown up to be an important part of Walt Disney's character ensemble. If we're talking about Mickey, Minnie, Pluto, and Goofy, we have to talk about Donald. Otherwise, the whole group would remain incomplete. Today in our video, we will get to know Donald Duck a bit more personally, specifically by learning about his family. The role of the family is quite important in understanding the personality of a character, and maybe by deepening into his family tree, we would understand the overtly mean duck a little better. Now, you might think I'm rather biased when I call him mean, but that's not quite the case. Since his introduction, Walt Disney has claimed Donald to be the problem child. Problematic is something that definitely describes Donald. Donald loves playing pranks on others, but he never knows when to draw the boundary. And 99% of the time, he ends up taking it too far. Plus, his general rude demeanor towards everyone doesn't help his case. However, he becomes the comic relief in our eyes when his victims fight back. His tendency to show off whenever he is good at something is one of the main reasons why he ends up in a pickle time and time again. Despite all of that, deep down, Donald is an extremely loving character. He knows very well that he has a temper problem, and he does his best to keep it all under check. He struggles with a lot of insecurities, specifically about his voice, and he has low self-esteem issues. These, paired with the ominous black cloud of bad luck that follows him around, are what turned him into this bitter duck. But is he the only one in his entire family who is like this? Let's see. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Clinton Coot, great-grandfather. Out of all the things that Donald has, the museum and the collector's items that he owns, they're all from his great-grandfather, Clinton Coot. Clinton was a bit different. He had what we call wanderlust. This man had the true taste of life, and he was not afraid to show it. His father, Cornelius Coot, was the one who created the Woodchuck Militia. This was the group that was solely focused on protecting nature, and Clinton decided that he wanted to carry his father's passion forward. So, he created Junior Woodchucks to carry forward the ideals of helping people and protecting nature. Later, Clinton decided that he wanted to go on a world tour. He did so because he heard about one of his ancestors, which by proxy means Donald's ancestor as well, Don Dugo, who was a great duck explorer. Clinton became an archaeologist because he was fascinated with Don Dugo and his three caballeros. He eventually figured out where the vault of Don Dugo was, and he managed to get inside it. He used whatever he found there to build the new Quackmore Institute with Baroness von Scheldgoose. However, the Baroness turned out to be a sly fox in Goose's clothing and scrubbed out Clinton's name from the history of the Institute. But this did not dampen Clinton's adventurous soul. He went to the Amazons, and he was the one to discover the Araquan bird, a fabled species, and an atlas that belonged to goddess Xandra. Clinton was unable to open the atlas, and he passed it on to his great-grandson, Donald. This is the atlas that we see Donald use in the story Legend of the Three Caballeros, where he goes on an adventure with Panchito Pistoles and Jose Carioca. As a great-grandfather, Clinton is extremely cool and inspiring. Humperdinck Duck, paternal grandfather. Humperdinck Duck, better known as Grandpa Duck, is the paternal grandfather of Donald. He was introduced in flashbacks, where Donald would reminisce about his childhood. When Donald was young, he used to live with his grandparents at their farm. He remembered vividly how Humperdinck would make him do all the chores around while he would do his share of helping by feasting on Grandma Duck's homemade delicious pies. But that did not mean Humperdinck was a bad duck. Time and time again, it was proved that he was one of the most prominent duck masters of his time. He was a dedicated and righteous grandfather, and that's how Donald remembers his grandfather. The Humperdinck that Grandma Duck remembered was obviously quite different from the duck that Donald remembers. In her eyes, Humperdinck was a sweet and loving duck who did not hesitate to lay down his jacket on mud to make sure her shoes and dress were not ruined. If that's not romantic, I don't know what is. If only Donald got his grandfather's charms.
Friends!
Grandma Duck, paternal grandmother. Elvira Coot is the loving grandma duck whom we often see as a loving cook who enjoys feeding her husband pies. But that's not all. She was an American pioneer, and she had come very far in the West, hidden away in a covered wagon. It was clear from the time period that was depicted that Elvira had lived through the American Civil War. How do we get to know about this? Well, it turns out that the money that she had been saving for some rainy day was actually Confederate money. We also learn that Humperdinck, her husband, was one of the many soldiers in the Civil War. While people praise her for her sublime cooking and are sure she had quite an adventurous life when she was young, Grandma Duck is quite old-fashioned in her own ways. She is not super keen on electric appliances, and we see her trying to avoid buying a vacuum cleaner or a television for as long as possible. However, she eventually relented when everyone around her seemingly got those. In the Donald Duck comics, we see that Grandma Duck has decided to live with Gus Goose, Donald's cousin, to take care of his farm. After all, she has quite the green thumb, and she enjoys life there.
You deserve better. I want you to work smarter, not harder, lad.
Fergus McDuck, maternal grandfather. McPapa is Donald's maternal grandfather. According to Scrooge, his father, Fergus, never quite trusted banks. He decided to marry a rich widow and settled down with her. The way Scrooge talked about Fergus made it evident that the father-son duo did not share the best relationship. But as Scrooge recounted more and more about his father, it became evident that this man was not at all stingy about money. When Scrooge decided to drop out in 6th grade, his father gave him $20 million to start. In the McDuck property, Scrooge was seen digging up wads of cash because of Fergus's general distrust towards the banks. Donald got a first-hand taste of it when he ended up ripping the fabric of an antique chair. From that cut area came wads of cash, which Fergus used as a stuffing, because back then, this was tax-free and hence cheap. If you've been a Donald fan for a while, you could be thinking that while this sounds awfully familiar, the name is not quite right. Well, you are right. When this particular backstory of Scrooge's father was given, he was not known as Fergus. He was known as Scotty McDuck. Then how did the name Fergus come to be? Well, the name came to be from the story The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck. Here, we see a whole different backstory of Fergus. Here, Fergus does not have a lot of money, and he does not marry rich. Their family is dirt poor. When Fergus sees Scrooge's innate talent for work, he urges Scrooge to work more and support the family. In this storyline, Fergus puts a lot of pressure on Scrooge to bring back the glory days of the Clan McDuck.
Weary for this? That dime isn't worth 10 cents here in Scotland.
Downy McDuck, maternal grandmother. Originally, Downy McDuck was known as Oreta Papareta, which is an Italian name. Oro means golden in Italian, and in the case of Dawny, the hair that cradles her face is golden enough. She was first introduced in a 1970s flashback scene. There, we saw the love story of Downy and Fergus. When Downy and Fergus came into the city, they were both unmarried and very much in love. In the beginning, these two lovebirds were extremely stingy about money, so they decided that they were not going to pay the state $1 to pronounce them husband and wife. But that didn't stop this power couple from having a loving relationship. They stayed together and had Scrooge, making Downy Donald's maternal grandma, the one he lovingly calls McMama. After Scrooge was born, Downy decided to be the one to cough up that $1 bill, and they were finally married. She is a loving and welcoming grandparent whenever we see her in the later comic strips. Quackmore Duck, father. Donald's parents were not super rich like his grandparents, but they were exceptionally loving. One of the earliest memories that Donald has about his parents is seeing them dance to the tunes of the gramophone. Donald recounts that they also enjoyed having fun together. When it was time for Donald to be drafted, Donald mentioned that his father was an aviator. The first time we see Quackmore is in a flashback of Donald in the story Donald Duck Writes a Book. Here, Donald reminisces about his father, and we get to see a portrait of him. In the portrait, we see that Quackmore had a curly mustache. We later learn more about Quackmore in The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck. Here we learn that Quackmore randomly stumbled across Hortense. Hortense had a very similar temper to him, and the sparks flew between them. This led them to getting engaged soon enough, as we saw them in the story titled The Empire Builder of Calisota. Here, we got an idea about Quackmore's current job, which was as a bookkeeper for Scrooge. By the end of the story, Quackmore and his family relocated from Duckburg. Hortense McDuck, mother. Hortense is Scrooge McDuck's younger sister. When she first made her appearance in the animated series, she was introduced as a parody of the painting Whistler's Mother. As we've mentioned before, her comic book introduction, as in a proper introduction, was done in the story called Donald Writes a Book. There, we saw Hortense dancing around the room with Quackmore, showing just how much the couple enjoyed each other's company and loved each other. Hortense was a fashionable young duck. She had a typical Anis Foley haircut, which she paired with a red dress that instantly made her eye-catching. We saw more of her in The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck, where she saw Hortense from Scrooge's perspective. She was the youngest sibling, and she was there when Scrooge left Scotland for America. She soon followed and came to Duckburg, USA. There she met with Quackmore, and the rest is history. One of the funnier mentions of Hortense was in the show Quack Pack. There, in one particular episode, Huey, Dewey, and Louie found a potion that made their uncle, Donald, keep growing younger and younger until he went back to being an egg. When the potion started taking its effect, the three little kids considered calling Hortense up, as this would be a big surprise for her. I personally found this incident extremely entertaining. Scrooge McDuck, Uncle. Uncle Scrooge may not seem like it, but he is one of the richest ducks in the whole wide world. Born and raised in Scotland, this duck is smarter than the Smarties, tougher than the Toughies, and then makes it squared. He is primarily known and loved for his extreme thriftiness. Scrooge has quite a bit of money, and he has a drip to show for it. He is seen in an iconic frock coat with a hat, pince-nez spectacles, and a cane. He is such an iconic character, memorable by both his personality and his character design. While one might think that the amount of money that this duck has is a sign of his frugality, I think that the money that he has also shows his industrial mindset. He is extremely resilient, and he is not willing to back down no matter how tough the situation gets, which is quite admirable. But there's no denying that Scrooge comes off as a greedy duck, especially when you see the amount of money he has in his money bin. The amount of money he has there is so huge that he can literally swim in it. Since his childhood, Scrooge has been extremely serious about his work. The first ever time he had the pleasure of earning was when he worked as a shoe shiner. The first time he shined shoes, on doing a great job, he was given an American dime. This American dime became one of his most prized possessions. This dime was also what set forward his journey as a businessman. Life in Glasgow was boring for him, and he decided that his fortune was not in Scotland. He emigrated to the United States. He found a home in Duckburg, and sure, the life in the USA was far better than the one he had in Glasgow, but Scrooge was not yet satisfied. He went on several adventures, which helped him grow his riches. Even though he had a heart of gold, his reputation as a shrewd business duck went far and wide, and most people steered clear of him for that. In various stories, we see a different iteration of his living status. However, one of the more popular places for Scrooge to stay is the McDuck Manor. There, in his money bin room, he swims around in his riches whenever he's not busy working. Over the years, Scrooge becomes isolated from his family members owing to his business endeavors. However, eventually, he comes around to Donald, and soon enough, the relationship between the uncle and the nephew blossoms beautifully.
Ragtime. There was Ludwig's ragtime band. And then
Ludwig von Drake, Uncle. Although introduced as a one-shot character, Professor Ludwig von Drake ended up garnering quite the fan base, so he had to be brought back. Meet Ludwig, Donald's eccentric uncle. Like most psychiatrists, this man is a self-proclaimed genius who loves giving lectures on the variety of things that he knows about. He dresses in an overcoat and specs, channeling the dark academia vibes that we can only ever dream of exuding. We learn that Ludwig is from Vienna, Austria, and he is obsessed with knowledge. He's the paternal uncle of Donald. When we look at the family tree, we see that the Drakes are a branch of the Duck clan. In the Duck clan, the Drakes are considered to be eggheads. Ludwig, who is obsessed with knowledge, has about 98 degrees from esteemed universities like Oxford and Cambridge. He has traveled the world and learned about whichever topic interested him. He claimed to have served in the army in 1917. He had shot down 5 planes on his first flight. This is what Donald was referring to when he said that he came from a daily life of aviators. But then, we learn that the 5 planes that Ludwig took down were from his side, which pushed him to start wearing glasses for the rest of his life. Ludwig even claimed to have been the one to create rock and roll. Not only that, but this world-famous lecturer decided to host a fitness program at one point, hoping to help people get fit with his knowledge. Despite being such a knowledgeable duck, Ludwig comes off as wacky. Paired with his forgetfulness and lack of social competence, he often ends up in comical situations. One of his many ongoing projects happens to be the source of his nephew's temper. He is obsessed with figuring out where Donald gets his temper from, because he's worried about his health. Like General Kenobi, Ludwig von Drake also introduces himself with a hearty "hello there," which I find quite adorable. Gideon McDuck, Uncle. Donald's Uncle Gideon is Scrooge's younger brother. He is the editor-in-chief of County Conscience, one of the most well-known newspapers in Duckburg. He also happens to be a business rival of Scrooge and his newspaper, the Duckburg Chronicle. Unlike Scrooge, who left Scotland, Gideon stayed. He founded his newspaper while in Scotland and then branched out, which resulted in one of the biggest branches being in Duckburg. For Gideon's newspaper, the mascot is Jiminy Cricket, which shows how much Gideon's paper is focused on figuring out and representing the truth. Unlike his brother, who ended up becoming a slave to money, Gideon did not sell his morals for gold. He stayed true to his morals and honesty, but you can easily draw a parallel between the two brothers. Gideon is just as obsessed with his readers as Scrooge is obsessed with money. In his eyes, it doesn't matter how many people read his newspaper. For Gideon, what matters is that the truth gets out through his newspaper. We often see him pride himself on being one of the most credible newspapers in the whole of Calisota, because the rest of the newspapers go through Scrooge's scrutiny owing to his influence. Scrooge sees Gideon as a real competitor and, more often than not, ends up offering to buy Gideon's newspaper company, hoping to get rid of the competition once and for all. However, Gideon never accepts his offer, leaving Scrooge disappointed. As Gideon is the brother of the world's richest duck, he is often compared with Scrooge, which ruins their relationship even more. Gideon wants to be recognized for his own work, which is more focused on crime solving and reporting about them. This makes him quite meddlesome in the eyes of the local police. But that doesn't stop Gideon from doing his thing. For Gideon, as long as the truth that he is working so hard on comes out, he's happy about all the troubles that he is being forced to go through. As much as he loves his readers, there are moments when Gideon is absolutely infuriated with them. That's when his readers want him to talk about celebrity gossip. Gideon never looks at those things as crucial news, so he never shows much of an interest in them. So seeing his readers invested in things like these infuriates him to the fullest. Rumpus McFowl, half-uncle. William Van Horn created this titular character. When the time of character design came into consideration, he took his inspiration from W.C. Fields and Monty Woolley from the film The Man Who Came to Dinner, released in 1942. William Van Horn wanted to create a character who was a lazy bum who somehow always managed to get the best breaks out of the whole group. William Van Horn specifically designed Rumpus to be strikingly visually different from the rest of the Duck Clan members. Since his first introduction, the infamous Rumpus became quite the recurring character in the comics. Scrooge and Rumpus were introduced as cousins. However, that relationship didn't stay this way for long. In the 323rd issue of Uncle Scrooge Comics, we learned the biggest secret that changed the dynamics between these two completely. Turns out that Rumpus McFowl is the son of Fergus McDuck. This makes him the half-brother of Scrooge, the world's richest duck. Since the cat got out of the bag, the relationship between the two changed drastically. Rumpus started climbing the social ladder of Duckburg with exceptional speed, and this was all because of Scrooge's popularity. Despite being the lazy bum he was, Rumpus started getting the benefits of having a rich brother. He started getting into rich social circles just by name-dropping Scrooge, much to the latter's dislike. But despite all that, Rumpus did not change his ways. His behavior was absolutely intolerable, and soon enough, his nephews, with whom he was living, tried to get him out of their house. Matilda McDuck, Aunt. Aunt Matilda is Scrooge's younger sister. We mostly see her whenever Scrooge is reminiscing about his childhood. Unlike Hortense, who had quite the temper that she eventually passed on to Donald, Matilda is extremely gentle and calm. She came with Scrooge to Duckburg along with Hortense. There, she worked with Hortense and Quackmore in Scrooge's money bin. When Scrooge was on a work trip abroad, Matilda meticulously planned a surprise reunion for the family when Scrooge returned. However, on the day of this reunion, reunion, things fell apart. That was because of Scrooge's unpleasant behavior. That was where we got to see the striking difference between Matilda and Hortense. When Scrooge ruined the reunion with his unpleasant behavior, instead of getting mad at him like Hortense was, Matilda was saddened by his actions. Eventually, after this fallout, Matilda took on the role of being the caretaker of the McDuck estate without telling Scrooge about it. This revelation was the push that the two siblings needed to fix their relationship. Soon enough, the two siblings ended up mending their relationship. In Donald's Homemade Christmas, we saw Matilda in Scrooge's flashback, where she was talked about rather fondly. It was clear that Scrooge had quite a good relationship with Matilda after they fixed their issues, and that definitely painted Matilda as a loving aunt in Donald's eyes. She also happens to be the adoptive mother of Gladstone Gander, so we also get to see her from Gladstone's perspective. Through and through, Matilda is a gentle and loving duck, and I can't help but wonder how things would have turned out if Donald was the son of Matilda instead of Hortense. Daphne Duck, Aunt. Daphne was first introduced in the 1949 comic known as Race to the South Seas. This was in 1949. Later, in the 1950s, we get a better understanding of the character. Daphne is the paternal aunt of Donald, as she was the daughter of Grandma Duck. Her husband was Luke the Goose, and she had a child, Gladstone Gander. In the life and times of Scrooge McDuck, we saw that Daphne and Scrooge had quite the run-in when they were younger. Daphne was out and about on Grandma Duck's farm when Scrooge was riding up the Kill Mule Hill, but he accidentally lost control of his car and crashed into Grandma Duck's farm. Daphne almost went under the car, but luckily got away just in time. Throughout the series, it was made clear that unlike Donald, who always had bad luck, Daphne, on the other hand, always had good luck on her side. This is a trait that she passes down to her son, Gladstone Gander. Daphne had so much luck on her side that she managed to find a diamond ring in an egg. I wish I knew how to find diamond rings out of eggs. While this character is quite interesting, we don't get to see much of her because Daphne ended up passing away after she ate too much at a free lunch picnic along with her husband. This led to Gladstone being adopted by Matilda and Gustav Gander. Della Duck's sister. Della is the sister of Donald. There was a little bit of confusion on whether she was his twin sister or not. Don Rose, the creator of Della, believed that if Della was the twin sister instead of his younger sister, there would be issues with the timeline. To prevent this, it was unanimously agreed that Della Duck would be Donald Duck's younger sister. Like Scrooge, Della is brave, ingenious, and charming. We don't see much of her in the comic strips, except when she leaves a message to Donald asking him to take care of her kids. However, when it comes to the animated series DuckTales, she plays a much more prevalent role. In the DuckTales, she is a travel companion of Scrooge and Donald. She's stubborn, and her stubbornness has led to a lot of problems in their travels. Here, we also see that Della had one of her legs amputated when the Spear of Selene crashed. Throughout this animated series, we get to see Della in an adventurous light. She went on a space trip with a rocket that Scrooge had built in secret and ended up on the moon. Not that anyone knew about it. People had assumed the worst when they lost contact with her, but Della survived. Della eventually came back as well. In one episode, we see her trying to figure out who Santa is, and that, along with the many adventures that she has had, showcases what a powerhouse of a character she is. Gus Goose, cousin. Gustav Goose is a distant cousin of Donald Duck. He's lazy, and he loves food a bit too much. He works as a farmhand for Grandma Duck. And sure, he gets to have a fair share of her delicious cooking, but that never stops Gus from being a sucker for gluttony. The first time he visited Donald's house, he ate his way through Donald's pantry. This obviously pissed Donald off a lot, as it would to anyone else. This led to Donald doing his very best and finding more than one way to kick Gus out of the house. He has made several smaller cameos in several different stories, like Mickey's Christmas Carol, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Mickey Mouse Works, and more. However, a significant role of his was in the story titled House of Mouse. In that animated story, Gus was a chef in a club. As expected, instead of serving the food that he was making, Gus would end up eating it all owing to his gluttonous nature. Pretty much in all the shows, Gus didn't articulate words properly. Whenever he opened his mouth, his vocals came out honking instead. Fun fact about this, behind the scenes, the sound production team used a bike horn to make his obnoxiously loud honking vocals. So yes, if you thought this noise sounded rather familiar, that's why. Gus made a cameo in Duck the Halls, a Mickey Mouse Christmas special, where he spoke for a change. There, he happily enjoyed Christmas even though he usually traveled south and didn't get to enjoy the holiday with his family. One funny thing that Gus did while celebrating Christmas was making a smoothie for himself, and the blender noise that he made while blending was often assumed to be Donald's, much to the latter's dismay. Gladstone Gander, cousin. We all have that one cousin who somehow has everything handed to them, even though they're lazy and absolutely undeserving of the treatment and the facilities that they have. In the case of the Duck family tree, Gladstone Gander would be that cousin. Gladstone is Daphne and Luke the Goose's son, but as we've mentioned, they both passed away after overeating at a lunch party. After this, Gladstone was adopted by Matilda. This made Scrooge his mother's brother's brother-in-law. Now, dear watchers, I'm sure you remember that I mentioned that Daphne had quite the wild luck. You see, that's because she was born under a lucky star known as the triple distelfink. Guess who shared the same birthday? That's right, Gladstone Gander. Gladstone inherited his mother's luck and the protection that the triple distelfink provided. This made him an extremely lazy guy. Owing to his astounding luck, without even lifting a finger, Gladstone got whatever he wanted. This led to him getting a lot of money and prestige, while his cousin Donald was always struggling to make everything go his way. You know how things turn out when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, right? That's pretty much the case between Gladstone and Donald. Gladstone, with his pride and prestige, thinks he is worth every good thing in the world, and Donald, with his ego, doesn't want Gladstone to get his way every time, especially when it comes to being Scrooge's successor of being Daisy Duck's lover. This leads to a few feuds between the cousins on several occasions.
Warning! Never drink seawater, tempting as it is.
Feathery Duck, cousin. If you've been a fan of Donald Duck for a while and still somehow managed to miss out on Feathery, don't worry. This is because Feathery was created for the European audiences in the first place. He was finally incorporated into American audiences properly in the late 1960s. Feathery was a recurring character in Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck Tales. He was shown to have a rather close relationship with Donald's tabby, even though the tabby cat, like most cats, hated Feathery. But Feathery was completely oblivious to this behavior. Owing to his popularity in the Brazilian fan base, his character was shown to have a significant character arc. In the Brazilian comic strips, Feathery ended up with a secret identity known as the Red Bat. This was his superhero moniker, and Feathery went about saving the day in his purple costume. In these comic strips, Feathery also had a girlfriend called Gloria and a nephew called Dugan.
Ahoy there, mateys! Welcome aboard!
Moby Duck, cousin. I'm sure you can guess what Moby Duck's job is from his name. So yes, as most of you have already guessed, Moby Duck is a seafaring sailor. The first time we saw him, he was saving Donald Duck from an accidental adventure that he had. You see, Donald had fallen asleep on his inflatable mattress, and somehow that mattress ended up in the sea. By the time he woke up, he had drifted away deep into the sea quite a bit. In this scenario, only an expert sailor would have been able to save him. And sure enough, Moby pulled through. After this incident, Donald served as Moby's first mate for a while. But soon enough, Donald was replaced by Dimwitty Duck. Moby also has a pet porpoise called Porpy. Like Scrooge, who is extremely serious about his work, so is Moby. Moby knows the sea like the back of his palm, and he is passionate about his work. Sometimes, we even get to see Moby transport Scrooge's cargo across the sea. He's a very responsible guy, and obviously, he is the best person for these types of jobs. In the 2000s, we get a separate story of Moby called La Storia della Baia, which translates into the story of the boy. In this story, Moby lost his sailing boat in a storm. He ended up teaming up with Feathery and went on great adventures with him. Along with all the fun, in this story, Moby also had two enemies, Azimuth von Quack and his servant, Sagola. Huey, Dewey, and Louie, nephews. These triplets, who are rambunctious and iconic, are the kids of Della Duck. They look very alike, and no one can tell them apart easily. So, to distinguish their characters, each of them is assigned a primary color. The oldest, Huey, is usually donned in red, Dewey is seen in blue, and Louie is always in green. Their personalities are so alike that they can even finish each other's statements, so you can imagine how crucial it is for them to have one key difference. Such a simple design change, but so iconic. They made their debut in 1937, and since then, they've been a fan favorite. These boys loved pranking people, and when they played a joke on their father by putting firecrackers under his chair, they accidentally ended up sending him to the hospital. Because of the dire situation of the family, their mother, Della, asked Donald to keep the boys with him for a while. This was supposed to be a temporary arrangement until their father was feeling better. However, Disney is famous for absent parents. Della was never heard from again. This led to the kids living with Donald for the foreseeable future. Since they entered into his life, Donald's life has been turned upside down. They enjoy tormenting the ever-loving Jesus out of Donald. And although Donald acts like he hates it and retaliates, deep down, it's clear that they love each other very much. The relationship that the siblings share is very cute, and there's so much love between the nephews and the uncle. At one point, Della asks to take the boys back, and while Donald is super happy about this at first, eventually he feels sad and starts missing the boys. So you can imagine how sweet the reunion between Donald and the kids is after this separation. However, if you're a fan of the animated series, you'll remember a different version of the kids, as these kids were much better behaved and calmer. Huey, being the older one, was often seen to be the responsible one. The triplets were seen accompanying Donald and Scrooge in their adventures, acting as helping hands. Daisy Duck, girlfriend. Daisy is Minnie Mouse's best friend and Donald Duck's current girlfriend. I have to say that when I was a child, I always looked up to Daisy Duck. She had a particular air of elegance about her, which in my eyes, Minnie never did. She had a dainty bangle on her hand, a pretty bow, and shoes that matched the dainty girl aesthetic she was going for. Everything about her screamed elegance and style, and I loved her for that. She's often seen scolding Donald for his bad temper, but fans know that Daisy herself has quite the temper. She's just better at anger management than Donald, which is why we never get to see her explode the way he does. But overall, I think Daisy is the epitome of a good girlfriend. She is a walking and talking green flag. She is supportive of her boyfriend and very gentle and kind to him. She knows he has flaws, and she has faith in her boyfriend. So when he says he's trying to be a better person, he's actually trying. Daisy uses their relationship to better Donald without succumbing and becoming his proxy mother, which I love. Daisy is also fun-loving and contemporary, and has quite worldly views compared to her friends, who are classic Disney characters. The way she talks, the way she walks, and everything she does exudes confidence, and it's great. Donna Duck, ex-girlfriend. But Daisy is not the only girlfriend that Donald has had. At one point, when Donald was traveling through Mexico, he met a beautiful duck called Donna. Donna and Donald had a lot in common, including their temper. Donna was exactly like Donald, and as you can imagine, the relationship did not last long. At first, Donald tried to impress her by riding the donkey that she was riding, but he did not like the animal. Then Donald bought a car to impress Donna, and sure, that worked for a while. But when the car broke down, Donna left Donald by driving away on her unicycle. Donna was clearly not the one for Donald, and I, for one, am very happy that he eventually ended up with Daisy, who is the one for him.
Do you want to kill somebody? Daddy?
Unnamed son. Did you know that Donald had a son? Well, we don't quite know what this kid's real name is, but it's assumed that his name is Donald Jr. Donald Jr. is a cute little baby who is very sweet and naive. Unlike Huey, Dewey, and Louie, he is very well behaved and is shown to look up to his father most of the time. Although he is too young to show the same type of tantrums that Donald shows, there are some clear signs that Donald Jr. has inherited his father's temper with some of the annoyed expressions that he makes. Despite everything, from the way he behaves, it's clear that this cutie patootie looks up to his parents. Also, did I mention that this baby is an exact carbon copy of Donald Duck? He looks exactly like a baby Donald, who has a blue jumper on him all the time, which is a tad bit oversized for him. That is the cutest duck I've ever seen, and I swear I go into cute aggression whenever I see him on screen. I mean, just look at how cute he is. My heart.
Kangaroo! My, what a
Joey, adoptive son. In the animated story called Daddy Duck, Donald is curious about what he would be like as a father. So he decided he wanted to adopt a child. And who did he adopt? A baby kangaroo called Joey, of course. This little baby was hyperactive, hungry, and very loving. Seeing Donald's dad instincts kick in whenever Joey was up to no good was so cute. So say what you wanna about the duck, but I think Donald would make a great dad. Marvelous verdict. A lot of us have grown up seeing Donald Duck. He's been a companion for a lot of us. And sure, while seeing his shenanigans on screen is entertaining, there's always something missing. By making this family tree, we've tried to provide you with all the necessary details that you might need to understand this interesting character a little better. While it's easy to brush him off as the angry character in the whole group, learning about his family tree and his relationship with his family members made me, as a fan, realize that under that temper of his, Donald is an extremely sweet duck. No wonder Daisy loves him so much. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.